Duchenne muscular dystrophy, or DMD, is a rare genetic disorder inherited in an X-linked recessive manner. It affects 1 in 3,500 live male births and is caused by the lack of dystrophin present in the muscle, resulting in muscle degeneration and eventual loss of ambulation. This dystrophy requires a complex, multidisciplinary approach tackling various systems of the body, like the muscular, cardiovascular, respiratory, and orthopedic systems. In addition to physical healthcare treatments, psychosocial management of DMD is also an important aspect of care for both DMD patients and their families, especially in terms of mental health, caregiver burden, and social support.
Hi, my name is Arshiya Dhiman, and I'm a fourth year molecular biology student hoping to pursue the medical field. I'm currently working at an endometriosis private practice, where I am right now, where we apply similar holistic approaches when treating patients and preparing them for surgery.
And my name is Tran, and I'm also a fourth year molecular biology student. I am pursuing a career in clinical pharmacy, and I'm interested in intersectional medicine and healthcare, especially to work with underserved communities.
While DMD is very complex and can affect many parts of the body, one less discussed area of research is the psychosocial impact DMD has on the patients and their families. In order to find out more about mental health and caregiver burden, we have members of the nonprofit organization Cure Duchenne. Cure Duchenne's work towards increasing research for Duchenne, as well as providing a variety of resources to families and DMD boys. As stated in their mission statement, they are committed to improving the lives of everyone affected by Duchenne through accelerating research to find the cure, improving care, and empowering the Duchenne community. So please welcome our guest speakers, and please describe your role at this wonderful nonprofit organization.
Sure, I can go. I'm Kerry Johnson. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at Cure Duchenne. I've been here for a few years now, working specifically with the families hand in hand and with my wonderful team. It's called the Cure Duchenne Cares team. We provide resources, support, and education to the global community that lives with Duchenne, as well as their caregivers, the rest of the family. We speak to many, many physicians, researchers, scientists. It's really a wonderful collaborative space. And our job here is just to honestly provide whatever we can for the families. We do a lot around here. We don't say no a lot. And we try to make their quality of life the best that we possibly can. And psychosocial help is one of those things we do. And I'll pass it on to my colleague Cheryl.
So I'm Sheryl Marrazzo. I work for Cure Duchenne with Kerry under the CARES group. So my role is I talk to newly diagnosed families. My son, Jake, has Duchenne. He's 19. He's away at college, doing wonderful. I am also a carrier of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I didn't know that when I had children. I passed it on to my daughter as well, who is a carrier, and she has a son with Duchenne and a granddaughter that we're unsure of her status as a carrier or not. But really what I do is I try to chat with a lot of Duchenne families that are new in their journey, just to let them know that there are resources for them. With Cure Duchenne, we do a lot with one-on-one meetings, talking to a scientist who can really talk in layman's terms that, some scientific jargon can sort of go over our heads, but we have someone on the team who can really lay it out, make it make sense, talk about treatments, and then just really let them know that there are some hard days, but it can be okay. And that it can be a positive silver lining, reaching kind of a thing. So that's kind of what I do with Cure Duchenne.
That's great. I'm so happy that we have such, a diverse guest crowd today for us, especially. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Cheryl, and as well as you, Kerry. To start off, I will just ask, I guess, a little bit more questions directed towards you, Cheryl. So, more specifically, how has your journey been as a caregiver, since your son does have Duchenne and you're also, a carrier of Duchenne, and how has it been providing for your loved one and going through this entire experience?
So Jake was diagnosed at 8 years old, which is kind of late for Duchenne. Jake has a duplication from 13 to 43, and it's an in-frame duplication, which means he does produce less than 5% dystrophin. They sort of had him as intermediate, but they said, oh, if he stops walking at 12, it's Duchenne. So before he stopped walking, we also dealt with a lot of mental health issues. There was a ton of anxiety, OCD, sensory issues, which I've come to find out happens to a lot of young men with Duchenne. I think it affects the brain a little bit from what I've seen. So the first thing that we dealt with was the anxiety and that kind of thing, going through therapists and medications. So we kind of found the right mix. Um, and then I always sort of knew something was wrong with him. I think as a parent, especially as a mom, you always know something's there. And I think we were missing it for so long. Like Jake walked on his toes and I brought him to Children's and they didn't diagnose him with Duchenne. So a lot of the beginning part is just sort of navigating through the information that's out there. And back then, there wasn't a ton of trials, there wasn't a ton of information. So at first, it's more of an information gathering. And then you sort of need to prepare yourself for these milestones that are going to happen that are different from a normal child. And I don't say normal and like my son's not normal, but the sort of the milestones that most children go through. So a lot of times for us, it was like carrying him when he was too tired. When I didn't know he had Duchenne, we would get angry with him and be like, dude, just walk up the driveway. Like, what's wrong with you? Because we didn't know.
Yeah.
Once we knew what it was, then we were able to address it by just sort of researching online. At first, when you're diagnosed, you have no idea what to do. You're in a pit of, it's horrible because you Google Duchenne and they're in a wheelchair at 12 and dead at 20. So that's sort of what you first see when you get diagnosed. So first you have to go through the dread and the pity and the how could this have happened to me and that kind of thing, which I think is a lot harder than some of the other things that we go through, like loss of ambulation, um, loss of being able to hug or brush teeth or things like that. I think the first the what you go through is tough, and who can understand it except for people that are in it, which is why I love what we do with Cure Duchenne, is because we help people navigate through that.
Mhm.
And then you sort of have to think that your life is going to be different than what you expected it to be. And that is a hard thing sometimes, even more for the father than the mother, at
Mhm.
least in our situation and many that I've spoken to. But you have to, you start to think, oh my God, how am I going to afford all of the things that this child will need? How can I get this child through this without him feeling sad and unusual and slower and all those things. So I think the beginning part of it is a lot more challenging because you really, it's like you live in Italy and you only speak English, so you have no idea what people are saying. I think I always liken it to that because you just have no idea what the future is going to be and wondering if you can handle it.
Mhm.
Like and that kind of thing. So I think a lot of the beginning is just like grief. I think you go through all the steps of grief until you hit acceptance. And then you're like, okay, now what do we do? And for Jake, he was glad he had a diagnosis of Duchenne because then it made sense to him. He's like, oh, now I know what it is, and it's not me, and it's not, anything else. So I guess I would say that in the beginning, it's just, it's emotional stuff that you go through more than anything else.
Yeah, no, I can never imagine, I like from what we've seen in class, especially with the, other case studies, like, depending on like, the time of diagnosis and also there's so many like things, we didn't even know about DMD before taking this course. And so to be struck with all of that information and then also trying to find a community within that to go through, the similar journey, must have been very difficult. And so, a question I also had was that, during this time when you were trying to understand, what Duchenne is and what other steps need to be taken, to ensure that your child's getting proper treatment. Did you find a community or did you find other, families who were going through the same thing that could help you make those decisions?
I did, but not right away.
Okay.
I think sometimes you don't want to be with your tribe until you're ready to be with your tribe. Just trying to like make peace with yourself with it. But what we did do was there wasn't a ton. So this is like, we've been 11 years, 10 years on this journey. Yeah, Jake's 19. So it's been 11 years. There were no trials that, were open. Facebook wasn't like a huge thing at the time. It's much bigger now. I don't even know if Instagram was around. I'm not even sure. Like, I don't know historically going back. But I think you try to really find organizations first that can help you. And within the organizations that we did find, I was able to connect with parents and to be with the same people that are dealing with the same thing that you are is wonderful. And in fact, I met a woman on an airplane. We were going on our Make-A-Wish trip to Seattle. And she was on the plane. She lived in New Hampshire, which is like one state off from me. And Jake was ambulatory at the time, but used a scooter when he got tired. So she said, "Does your son have Duchenne? I just saw him walking, and that's how my children walked." And so we connected that way. And then she connected me with all kinds of other people. I did a triathlon with a lot of moms, which if you knew me, I'm no athlete, but like you become this like super woman when you like, "You're ready, let's go. We're gonna cure this, we're gonna fix this." And I think for me now, especially, I see so many newly diagnosed people pose questions on like the Duchenne groups. And I like the fact that there's so many of us that have been on this journey for a while to let them know it's going to be okay. And what I wouldn't have given for that at the beginning, to be able to talk to somebody whose son was in college and lived independently, because I never thought that would happen with my son. So I think now there's so many more resources than there were then. And the other thing too is, how do you explain to other people what it is? Like, people be like, Carrie and I were just talking about this recently. It's like, people be like, "Oh, just have him exercise, he'll be fine," like not really understanding what it was. And how do you say, if you Google it, my son might not live till 20. How do you even express that to someone else without making them feel terrible?
Yeah.
So I think finding the community and sort of talking to them and seeing their experience, whether it be good or bad, because not everyone has a positive outlook. That's just how life is. But I think the community that we have now is amazing. We have so many wonderful organizations that are helping. We have wonderful clinics. And we're gathering more and more information all the time. Like, I want to say that is it 1 in like 5,000 now live births or something? Like, there's additional information coming as well. And I think you definitely have to find your tribe and find kind of attach yourself to the ones that you most align with. Whether it be positive or whether it be trying to find a cure or trying to live a good life, sort of that kind of thing. But there wasn't much when we were diagnosed, but right now there's a ton. So it's so good for the newly diagnosed people, and my daughter being one of them, right? So, and now she has us to, look at and follow. So,
Yeah. And I think, Sheryl, like, the organizations that support families with Duchenne need to be aware that, if a newly diagnosed mom gets on a call, I can only give her so much information, right? I don't have a child with Duchenne. I know the disease very well. I know the community very well, but this is why having someone like Sheryl on my team to be able to have that sort of direct connection and that level of empathy and experience that I have not ever touched in my life, it's a unique experience. And I think, so many newly diagnosed families, or even families who have just been on this journey for a while and haven't found their tribe, I think it's a really positive experience for them to find someone that has experienced these things before and that is reaching their hand back and saying, "I'm not going to let you do this alone. I'm not going to let you do this the wrong way. We're going to figure it out together." And you would be like, your mind would be blown at the amount of people who want to reach back and help the other families. Like, I have people calling me all the time, "Please link me to new families. I'm happy to call them," and stuff. So it's kind of amazing. It's a great community.
yes.
Yes, that sounds amazing what you both do, like just helping others, like reaching out so that they do have that social support that maybe some people are hesitant to find, to like reach out and find.
Yeah.
So off the topic of like, you said that there are so many resources available for Duchenne now, like as we were like researching and learning about in class, there's like a bunch of organizations and information out there. So I was curious about, how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your access to healthcare and community support, and like how online resources may have changed, or like if there are any creative outlets regarding that?
Yeah. I can start on this one because, I mean, we had, how Cure Duchenne works is like, we go to a ton of different states per year. We fly in, we invite the local community, the local physicians, even the local advocates and resources, and we put on things like workshops. And it's a great way to connect in person and sort of forge those connections and help people, boots on the ground. We also have like a big conference. We fly into cities and have dinner sessions where it's like a mental health sort of, we're just connecting with families and letting them talk for once without any judgment about Duchenne. And of course, all that stopped, right? So what we had to do was, how are we going to continue our program? Because not only is this scary for everyone right now, I think it's two times as scary for Duchenne families who have immunocompromised kids who might already be introverted, who might already be at risk, isolated. For some of these guys, like school was the absolute highlight of their day. It was what they participated in, their social outlet, and that was gone too, right? So we had to pivot quickly. And I actually think, finding the silver lining of COVID was the amount of resources and the amount of virtual programs we came up with, like right off the bat. So, March we got shut down, and I think by June we had released a 6-week webinar series called Embrace This Moment. And we took 2 weeks at a time, and the first week was the early kind of journey. It was called like beginning your journey, and it was for newly diagnosed families. The second was growth and transformation. It's for those adolescent families, and then spreading wisdom for adults with Duchenne. So it was this really great way. And we found, oh my gosh, we had like over 1,000 registrants for this, more than we could do in a year, right? Of families we could meet. We met over a 6-week period. So it really did open up the people that would be boots on the ground coming to our workshops. They came to the virtual events, but so did the people who weren't ready to meet people in person, that maybe lived in rural areas and it was hard to get their kids, out to different resources. So we changed a lot. We started doing a lot of Zoom talks like this. We call them coffee talks and cocktail talks. And the cocktail talks are very fun. But it's kind of that one, like we just get, 10, 12 families on the line. Everybody has a drink in their hand, and you just talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So while of course it was difficult because, Kim, back to your question of access to healthcare, like, yeah, these kids were not going to clinic anymore. Like, you go to clinic every 6 months, we're doing all these tests, making sure you're stable. That was shut down, and telehealth can only do so much. You're not going in for an echo. You're not going in for, an MRI. And that must have been extremely frightening, Sheryl. I'm sure you can speak to this, to some families. But I was amazed by the physicians who opted into our virtual programs and said, we want to help. We know the families are scared. We know there's a lack of resources right now. What can we do? And I was really proud of what our community was able to pull together. It lasted so much longer than we ever thought it would. I think everybody can empathize with that. But we're still doing it. We're starting to go back in person. But anything we did virtually, we built into a resource library that lives now for the Duchenne community. It's a growing kind of online resource that hadn't existed before. So I would say that there is, good and bad. While healthcare was a really tough topic for the families over the past 2 years, some of them actually made friends and forged relationships. But Sheryl, I don't know about your personal experience of gaining access to healthcare, because was the clinic shut down?
So the clinic was shut down, but I was lucky enough to be in the same state that they were in. So I only did like one cardiac virtual. So Jake goes biannually, to go, and they check his heart, his lungs, his blood work, his bone density. It's his MRI of his heart. Like, it's 2 very long and grueling days, that you get to do twice a year. And as a parent, you hold your breath every time, because you go and you find out information. And I think the earlier you find out the information, the more you can intervene, like with medication, with cough assist machines, with all those things. And I felt really bad for the parents that were doing all virtual, especially older guys, where like their heart and lung function is really important to keep track of, to know if you need to change medication, if you need to add, things like that. So it was scary. So I kind of was lucky enough to do most of our stuff in person with masks. They did only let like one parent go to do some of the like the echo and things like that, which if you have to lift your child and it's, the mom or the dad, so I'm lucky enough I can still lift Jake. But if they don't have a Hoyer lift, or if they don't have the correct positioning equipment, there's so much, to that. So that was kind of tough. So I guess with that part of it, it wasn't so bad. But I know a lot of families that travel to my clinic from across the nation and the world who were not coming here. So one of the things I did learn was, wow, I really need to make connections with a local clinic, right? So that if I can't get out there, I have, these people here. So, but on a personal level, COVID was really hard. I was actually a salesperson, and Jake was in school, and he had a one-on-one, and he was actually supposed to be in a play that weekend. He was going to be Shmi and Peter Pan. So on that Friday, they said, "Oh, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks." Well, that's 2 years ago today or yesterday, but so it still happened. But I had to quit my job. I couldn't, I could not have a PCA come in and take care of Jake because we were petrified of COVID. Like Jake has like, his lung capacity is at like 60, 59, 60%. So for him to get COVID could have been a disaster. Not only that, his heart function, is his ejection fraction is down as well. So we were petrified. But at the same time, it also leveled the playing field. Like people were like, "Oh my God, my kid can't go out." I'm like, "Hey, welcome to our world. Like that's what we live in every day." So I think people really got an idea of like, Jake's in a wheelchair. He can't just go to someone's house, right? So as much as like the kids, were sad, I was like, boo hoo, we've been living this for a long time. So at least now there's this level playing field. And a lot of guys also play like video games. So like this was still an opportunity for them to reach out and be with other kids that have Duchenne or siblings or what have you. I know that my daughter struggled because she had to also, her kids were younger. Like Jake was a senior in high school, so a junior and senior in high school. So I didn't have to sit with him and do everything. But for my daughter, it was horrible because she had to stay home and two children to keep motivated on Zoom and stuff like that. And so that was challenging. And I think she did PT virtually as well, which it's really good to have a good PT resource like online that you can connect with so that you can continue to do these things when you can't have people, in the house. So I think for me, it was tough because like, I lost my salary. I lost, my, what I, Cheryl, what I did. And it was just all about Jake. And, I love my son. I would do that, but I was also living this great life of, helping people in the operating room and that kind of thing. So it was really hard for all of us to, be home. And then my husband still works from home. So he worked from home. The dogs didn't know what to do because everybody was here all the time. And now when they're gone, they don't know what to do. But so I think there's so many things wrapped up in this pandemic is, that I had to be the caregiver, for a medically fragile child who needed me to do everything, right? Like if he has to go to the bathroom, I have to take him to the bathroom. If he wants to get out of bed, if he wants to get dressed, if he wants something to eat. So it was hard. Like, again, as much as he's my son and I would do anything for him, it was a huge change and I had to really pivot. And I was actually lucky that I started working with Cure Duchenne because I was able to do what I loved and talk to people and still be involved somewhere else. So that kind of saved me a little bit to be able to have that part of it. Um, but I think like as far as the medical portion of it, I think the hardest part was for people who traveled for care, really needed to have a home base as well to be able to handle emergent things. And I think about, kids like breaking a bone could be devastating, right? And their parents weren't like, if you were 18, your parent couldn't even stay with you. Like how horrible is that, And so I think about there's so many other things with the pandemic that, you know, so many families deal with. But for me, it was really quitting my job, staying home, and being a full time caregiver and a mom at the same time. So I'm dealing with all his physical issues, but all those emotional issues too. Like, I want to go back to school. That's the only social stuff I get. So, even trying to like meet people in the parking lot and like sit 6 feet apart or, what have you, but he always needed me to do it. It's not like, these kids could jump in a car and drive to the parking lot and hang out with their friends. Mom had to take them, and that kind of stinks when you're 17, 18 years old. So I don't know. There were so many things with the pandemic that were emotional, social, physical. It was really hard at first, but we definitely tried. We started cooking. We started, riding bikes all the time. We have a bike pull, Jake has a seat that he sits in and we can pull him. We went for walks. So we tried to like, okay, we're not going to be stuck with, after 2 weeks, we got to get back. We got to do stuff. And I think that really helped our family. And I know that having things virtual was amazing because even people that, didn't even want to talk, right? They could keep their camera off, but they could still be a part of it. So I think the fact that we could pivot to do virtual things is still wonderful now, right? Because now we can do it,
Mhm.
where before nobody really did it, but even now. So I think it gives access to more people, the virtual aspect of getting together with others that sort of live your life. I hope that answered your question and I didn't get too far off track there.
No, Cheryl, you did a wonderful job explaining that. But I did have some follow-up questions. I know you did speak about, all that, isolation anxiety, especially during COVID, and the roles that you had to step into, even more than so as a caregiver, as a mom, as doing everything for your children. I just wanted to know, during that time, how are you taking care of yourself? Like, I know you said, like, having those resources to talk to other families was a great outlet in a sense, but when you weren't a mom, when you had that small time just to, take everything in, how did you take care of your own personal health? And then also towards Carrie too, I know you had the responsibility of putting on these events for these families, and I'm pretty sure that was also a huge, responsibility on your shoulders too. And how did COVID, you know, how was your mental health impacted by that as well?
Mm.
So whoever would like to go first.
Yeah,
Do you
go
want me
ahead.
to, do you want me to just tack on to what I was just talking about? So I'll be fast. So what I did was I woke up an hour before I got Jacob. So I had an hour of Cheryl time.
Mhm.
I would exercise is huge, 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 huge. Whatever it is. I would also read like positive mental attitude type books and listen to podcasts, which I had kind of done anyway, but I really dove more into it. And I just tried to make sure I had time for myself, whether it's, and he wanted to stay up a little bit later because he was older, but it was, I think you really just need to get up earlier, make time for yourself, also make time for your relationships, right? Because I have a husband too, right? And I need to take care of that as well. So for me, those are the things that really, worked and kept me positive and kept me going. I think oftentimes when someone has a fragile child, they don't think that they should take time for themselves. But yes, you absolutely should, because, you can't pour from an empty cup. I mean, I could talk, say a million of those sayings, but you really need to care for yourself before you can really care for someone else. So I think that you have to do that whether you want to or not. But for me, it was definitely exercise, reading, listening to positive things, getting bird feeders and feeding my birds. And I bought a book so I could check off which ones they were. So I think you just have to find your thing that will sort of get you through it, because it does stink sometimes.
I think the last part of your question, I mean, it all happened so fast, right? To have to pivot to put together kind of like an educational program, because the Cure Duchenne Cares program is sponsored. So like we, put on certain educational events, and we have sponsors that we answer to, and that's how a lot of kind of nonprofit programs work. But we had to pull something out, right? And it all happened very fast. But it actually at the same time, um, I would say one of the challenges of when we do our educational events, like say a workshop, it's like a full day event. We bring in doctors, we have presentations and conversations. Everyone in the Duchenne community is at a different journey, like a point on their journey, but also like the progressions are different. The people are different. The family structures, like the amount of variety, it's like snowflakes, right? So it's so hard to stand in front of a room full of people and maybe you're only capturing the attention or you're really serving a percentage of that room. But with the virtual kind of component where we were able to break it out and say, hey, this week we're going for the newly diagnosed families or the families within this, not even an age range, right? It's how you feel. What's your knowledge base of Duchenne? Do you feel as though you know more than your doctor, or do you feel as though you have so much to learn? Um, I thought that was a really wonderful part of my job, but yeah, to your point, it's a huge responsibility to put these educational programs together. What I will say is I have a wonderful team, and working in the Duchenne community, not being personally affected. I mean, now personally affected because these people are my family. I love them. But I have an immense amount of perspective and privilege. So my mental health, I'm not saying it's not important, but I think when I'm able to, get stressed out or feel as though, okay, there's a huge weight on my shoulders, I get to look at some of my colleagues and some of my peers and just say, okay, they're doing this, I can do this, we're good. Yeah, but other than that, maybe just like make a roast chicken or a pan of brownies and you're going to be fine. But yeah, I would say the people I work with in the community, I get to chat with all the time, give me perspective and strength, and um, you know, they are going through a lot, and I respect them more than anyone. So
That's great that like both of you get to just have self-care time, but also like find your own passion just like by helping others and caring for your family. And I was also curious about just like, so mental health and just disability in general is a pretty sensitive subject. And I think like just global perspective, it's changing as like a lot of organizations and people are fighting to destigmatize and raise awareness about it. So I was curious about how maybe you or the DMD community or just like maybe like the healthcare community perceives mental health and how like it should be treated.
yeah, Cheryl, I feel like, do you want to talk about your personal kind of journey with mental health? Because I know that this is your bread and butter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm going to talk more about Jake. He struggled with anxiety. I think I had mentioned that in the beginning. And we tried different medications, which that is really hard. And honestly, the anxiety at times is way harder than Duchenne could ever be. I'm not an anxious person, so how do you help how do you help someone like that? So I went to therapy to learn I need to be with them, right? So you can't make everything beautiful and pretty because man, sometimes it just isn't. And I think you have to be with people where they are and then just say, I get it. That stinks. That's awful. And he would be so anxious. He had no friends at school. I would get phone calls all the time. We tried therapy because I didn't want to put him on meds at first. I was like way against that. And I tried therapy and what have you. And then Jake pulled all his eyelashes out and he pulled out tufts of hair on his head. And at that moment, when I picked him up from the bus stop and I saw the bald spot, we both cried together. And then we're like, okay, we need a plan. We need a path. What we're doing isn't working. And I think you have to be okay with that. You have to be like, okay, we tried this. Now let's try something different. We ended up finding a cognitive behavioral therapist who is amazing. They connected. Now, mind you, she didn't take my insurance and she wasn't accessible. So I had to carry him in and out and pay for it. Thank God I'm lucky enough to be able to do that. Not everyone is. But she just made so many wonderful changes for him because I couldn't say stop being anxious. You know, he's like, you don't think I really don't, you really think I want to be anxious? Like, I really don't want to be this way. And it's not as easy as that. So I think finding the tools so that you have a toolbox of things that you can pull out. You know, he had anxiety about being separated. Like, right, if you fell and nobody was there to help you, how awful would that feel? Right. Like, and I think he slept in our room and then the cognitive behavioral therapist had him go into his own room and we sat with him and now he's in college alone with like strangers taking care of him, right? So it can get better. And I think that's what I always try to tell people. It gets better. It does. Like it's hard to know that when you're in it, like when someone breaks up with you, it gets better, right? Like you feel horrible at first, but then it gets better. But I think we try to advocate a lot for disability as well. I know you talked about that at the beginning of your question, Kim. I'm actually in my town, I'm on a board of a disability commission. So we try to make sure people are in compliance, but also educate and try to educate with kindness. Sometimes that's really hard because you want to be like, why would you park in a handicap spot if you're not handicapped? I'd glad to give you Duchenne if you want to park there. You know, it is a perk that we get. But so I think the biggest thing that I learned is we were angry at first, but sometimes people just need to be educated. And when you do that, then they're like, oh my God, I'll never do that again. I didn't even realize, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, you'll always have jerkweeds that, you know, do it anyway and they don't care. But, you know, like the lines that are next to a handicap spot so that the ramp can be deployed, people would park there not thinking, oh, we can't get Jake in and out of the car unless we back up or what have you. So we actually created a magnet that we put on the side of our car that created an awareness campaign. And we sent them to a bunch of Duchenne parents because that's a big deal to us, access. You know, and I always thought, well, Jake's with us, so we can figure it out. But what if he drives by himself? Or what if any disabled person drives by themselves? How they can't get in and out. So they have to sit there and, you know, wait for the person to come out. So I think a lot of advocating is really important with kindness and with just sort of education, just so that people know. Um, so sort of that was kind of what we, what, and actually it makes me feel better to educate people. Like in driver's ed, I don't even think they talk about that the access aisle. They don't even talk about it. And Jake went through driver's ed and they didn't. So I know that for a fact. So we just try to educate and advocate. And even like, we have like a Facebook page and we'll put things on there like, if you park on the sidewalk, we can't get by. And sometimes again, people are like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. And even in our own town, they would have like a lamp post where the ramp would go out. And they're like, we didn't even think of that. Or they'll have a ramp on one side, but not on the other. Like, how are you supposed to get across the street? And I think what I enjoy about that is when you talk to people and they're like, oh my God, I never even thought of that. And now they did. And you hope they tell other people and they share it and things like that. So I think advocating just with one person, you hope that it sort of spreads and gets out there. But a lot also, like with the mental health, family really didn't understand. They're like, wow, this kid is just a brat, not realizing like he's losing his ability to walk, and that sucks. Like you have to be with him in that. But I think it's important to find the tools, whether it's therapy, whether it's meditation, whatever it works for you. But to not have that angry feeling, I think is really important. And to have empathy and I don't want to say sympathy because I'm not sure that's the right word, but empathy to sort of carry your child through what they're dealing with. Because it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be angry. We would have a pillow. And so if Jake was mad, he would just punch the stink out of the pillow and he felt better. And so I think instead of saying, oh no, it's okay, everything's okay. Life doesn't work like that, right? You have to sort of be with them where they are and just sort of give them the tools to get through it when they're ready for that.
I think, looking at it from a different perspective, mental health now and psychological help within the Duchenne community, I think is quite a bit more present. In a lot of clinics, they do have, maybe not at every clinic visit, but they do have like a psychologist or like a licensed counselor that does meet with the individual with Duchenne. But also I've noticed that some clinics really do advocate for the caregivers as well, and for maybe marriage counseling, for just for caregivers, to have respite care and letting them know it's okay. We always say taking care of the caregiver. Oh, take care of yourself. How are you supposed to do that when you have a disabled kid who needs you all the time? People don't think about the reality of the logistical situation that these families are in. And I've found, I hear more and more from clinics that they're having people like social workers help with this. So it's not just directed towards the guys, which I think is so extremely needed, but think about the caregivers, think about the siblings, think about what these kids are going through. They need mental health support. Really, it's a totally overlooked area. So Sheryl and I have had the opportunity to meet some wonderful people, like Paige Lembeck. She's a pediatric psychologist, and she worked in Duchenne for a while, and she would bring in the family, she'd bring in the siblings separately, she'd bring in the individual with Duchenne. If there's multiple kids with Duchenne in the family, breaking them apart, because they're always together, right? Breaking them apart. How do you feel about this? So I think, and I love to see that it is becoming more and more included in care. And just from a Cure Duchenne point of view, we made a pivot about 2 years ago to include mental health in absolutely everything we do. It is one of the pillars of every single educational seminar we do now, because it's needed, and it is, I would say, just as important as the physical care for everyone in the family.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much. Like, it is so much easier said than done, obviously, like mental health is such an important topic nowadays, and it affects everyone. And so I think just definitely raising awareness and having that support that, yeah, it is okay to have these feelings. Just now we have to learn how to, cope with them, and like how to go about them when we do feel angry or anything of that sort. And so, I really appreciate what Cure Duchenne does, and especially, your insights, Sheryl. So moving more towards what Cure Duchenne does. So what other like resources do they have, and how are you connected to it, Sheryl? And so, providing for mental health resources, your educational seminars, where is Cure Duchenne, pivoting towards to in the future, and what are the current resources they have now, you know, as we're transitioning hopefully out of COVID and the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah. So we, as I said, even, if we're doing it virtually or in person, we make it kind of one of the pillars of what we're going to talk about if we do an educational seminar. So we would include somebody from, the social worker or the psychologist, to discuss things. You'll hear words like anticipatory grief. And you'll hear about respite care, and you'll hear about all these things that are, maybe feelings that people in the Duchenne community have been having, but didn't have a name for them yet, right? So that's kind of how we incorporate it into our general programming. And then I would say that things like the coffee and cocktail talks and the dinner sessions we do, those are like completely mental health focused. We just let people come as they are, no pressure. You can talk, you can not talk, you can cry, you can say, I'm having an absolutely horrible time, I'm in the deepest pits of whatever. And there's going to be another person on the call that says, I'm down here with you. What are we going to do about it? So those Zoom calls, I think, have honestly been a lifeline. And we do get people whose children have passed away, and they still come back and they still feel as though they want to be a part of this community because they need this. They have the people who understand what life they lived, and now that their kiddo is gone, it's a whole new world that they need to navigate, and they can't do that alone. So those are some of the programs we have that help families. But I would say the most important one is our Cure Duchenne one-to-one program. So we do a ton of, like people from all around the world join our webinars, and in different cities, we hold big conferences. But the most important part of our job is when we get online one-to-one with families. Whenever I have a newly diagnosed family, I pull Sheryl onto the call and have her tell her journey, and kind of just sit back and take notes and say, oh, you need resources about how to understand what your mutation means. And from there, making that connection, we just are able to establish almost like a checklist for them to help them just, focus on one thing. Because it's like the world has ended, right? How do we get them to focus on, okay, what are we going to do first? Let's understand what the duplication of this to this means. Let's talk to our scientific advisor. We also have physical therapists who are experts on our team who meet with families. And it really is, some people are like, I had no idea this was here. I had no hope. I have felt, so alone. And it's great to know that there's a team of people. So that's genuinely my favorite part of this job. I think of Cheryl's job too. We absolutely love the one-to-one calls, and we try to do them as often as we possibly can. And most of them are focused on how to cope with the disease at first.
I think for me, I'm lucky because I have two sides of Cure Duchenne. I have before I was working with them, and then I have now that I'm working with them. One of the first conferences I went to was sponsored by Cure Duchenne in my area, and actually the two PTs that are still here were there, and we were looking at like wheelchairs and equipment and things like that, and just to get all of us in a room to like be together is, I can't even tell you how amazing it is that you are with your people. And they're truly there to help you understand, because there is science, right? So you want to know what's going on with cures and things like that. And Kerry can talk better about like that model that Cure Duchenne uses. But just to get people together in a very safe space, even providing childcare so that a parent can actually be present and listen to what's going on without having to like worry about their child, and
or saying something that makes their kid feel like
exactly
a burden, right?
it is, or saying something when you start to talk about the end of Duchenne, that's tough to hear. So I think that those things are important. It's a very safe, educational and social environment. And like we've met families were like, hey, I don't need this scooter anymore. Do you need it? Like, so it just really is an invitation for this amazing community that we have. And now working for Cure Duchenne, when I first started working, that was what I was to do, talk to newly diagnosed families. We try to share a positive, mostly outcome atmosphere, but also just to be with people on their journey. And again, just to have someone that's been there, done that, it's priceless to be able to have someone to, bounce ideas off of, or, say, geez, I don't know, I really wish I didn't get the chair lifts. I wish I had gone just elevator because put that on my credit card and I'm still paying for that when I ended up having to do this anyway. So there's so many life lessons and things like that. And one of the things that, Kerry, you were talking about when people pass away, the other thing too is in our community, and this just happened this week, is a 25-year-old, boy died. And I remember him at a conference and he was dancing and happy. And when I feel like when one of ours goes, it hurts us all. I mean, obviously the parents, it's devastating, but it hurts us all because it sort of is like a reality slap, like, so Jake's in college, he's doing great, da da da, but like you still never know. And I think what I love about Cure Duchenne is they don't talk about they talk about what to do then, but like how can you make every day as amazing as it can possibly be, so that there's no, because we don't all know how long we have, right? Like we don't know. And so I think that positive reinforcement, we're with you, what do you need from us? How can we help? Because it changes all the time. So I think that that's just such an important aspect of that. So I've been lucky enough to sort of see both sides of it. And I'm just so happy to like be here and help as much as I can. And it helps me feel better, helping others feel better. So it's a little selfish in a way, but that's okay. We'll get there. But so that's my part of that.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed hearing you guys, speak about your wonderful experiences, especially with, being a part of a community. I mean, the work you guys both are doing is really transformative, especially in spreading awareness. And it's incredibly, it's probably impacted so many families, just to know that you guys are there for their support. Just like, one phone call or having one friend to talk to, or just to, have a question and have it answered can affect someone's day so much. And so, I'm really happy to have found you guys, because it's absolutely amazing. Something I also do at UCLA too, we're a part of a Alzheimer's initiative. It was a student-run nonprofit organization, and so we kind of sort of just help Alzheimer's patients and dementia patients with packets, and stimulating workshops for them. So to prevent the disease and also to help create a community of like socialization and prevent that isolation that they also probably feel. So I'm a little bit of aware also about the nonprofit sector, probably not as much as, you guys are experts, but that's something, in the future I would hopefully also want to be a part of. And so I guess, one of the concluding questions we do have for you guys today, since both me and Kim are trying to, pursue the medical field, and like, what would you like healthcare professionals, current and future, to be aware of regarding DMD in your situation? And then do you know if like there's any suggestions you have in like healthcare and interactions with physicians that you would hope we as physicians would be able to improve on, either with the patients or families?
Oh, can I go first? I do have to jump in just a second to another meeting, but my feedback there is, as a physician, your presence in kind of the community side matters to families. When families see that, hey, I see this doctor in clinic, but I also see that they, attended a dinner with Cure Duchenne and they showed up in their jeans and a t-shirt and chatted with families. That stuff matters so deeply. And it just creates sort of like a trust that I think you genuinely need to have with your patients when you're in a rare disease community, because these families fight nonstop for the best care, for the best equipment, for the best quality of life for their kids. And it just shows you're an ally to them outside of the clinic as well. That has been my sort of best experience is the doctors. I know some of them even have my phone number. Hey, could you come speak at this? And they're like, I'll move my schedule. I'll be there. Can I bring my kids? What? So you really care. I know you guys really care. And I think that there are tangible ways to show that and to build that trust. And my only last thing is I've found that the families that give the best feedback about doctors are the doctors that listen. They listen intently. I know one of my old colleagues, one of my very good friends, said, one of the doctors, Dr. Wong at UMass, the first time they went, she sat on the floor with the kid and she cried with him. She let him cry. And he said, I hate steroids, don't want to be on him. And she said, boom, you're coming off steroids then. You know what I mean? It wasn't just the clinical mindset. It was, you're a human being, you're a person with these emotions, and let's listen to this kid, who's probably mature beyond their age if they're battling a rare disease, right? So show up and listen. Those are my two things. And I'm so sorry, I'm gonna jump off, but I just wanted to say, I'm absolutely amazed by the fact that you guys are doing a 10-week, I think you said, Duchenne program. And you please call us if you need anything or if you want to participate with our program. We do have a workshop coming up. It's actually after summer, I think, in LA, but I'm going to make sure to reach out to you guys. Maybe you could join us that day.
I think one of the things that I can say is we were diagnosed in one clinic, we went to another clinic and another clinic and then another clinic. And when we went to that last clinic, she spent more time with us collectively than we had ever spent with a neurologist prior to that. And I can't tell you how amazing that felt. Because you figure you get this diagnosis and it's awful and they're not listening. Their bedside manner is not that great. And I think that's with every doctor. Every doctor can learn to have that. You want to feel heard. And like a perfect example is my mom just went through some surgery and she unfortunately passed away, but the doctor was amazing. Like, he listened to her, he looked her in the eye, he wasn't looking at his watch trying to, get going. So I think that's really important, to just that they care and that they're listening. Our current neurologist, writes things on her hands. She remembers everything about Jake. Jake has been on Dr. Phil. He wrote a book, and she's always like, what are you doing now? Like, what's going on now? And she'll tell everybody in the clinic. And so everybody that comes in is like, so Jake, so I think it's that family feeling, and that feeling of being heard and listened to, and offer suggestions and recommendations that make sense. And I think I love the fact too that what Kerry was saying is that people come to the sessions and they talk to you. So when I was at a Cure Duchenne session, my whole team was on stage talking. Like, how cool is that they care enough on a Saturday, to come and hang out with us and talk with us. The clinic I go to right now is just amazing, and it's really close to me, which is super cool. We flew to Cincinnati to see this Dr. Wong, to see her, and thankfully we found out she was moving closer to us. So I think that's really, that's just awesome. And just to hear you and listen and care, look you in the eye, make you feel better and not worse. A lot of people that I know, the doctors, after they were diagnosed, said to the parents, take your child home and love him. There's nothing we can do. Who wants to hear that? Nobody. And I'm like, thank God no one ever said that to me, because I'd be like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I just find that so horrible, and the other thing too is I think that people need to understand Duchenne, not just Duchenne doctors, but like emergency room doctors. Like, I have to explain to them what it is. And like, after you have a break, you could have an embolism that's awful and like you could die from it. But they're like, oh, no, it's fine. Or, the liver enzymes are elevated. Well, that's normal for Duchenne. So I think there's just so much more education, not just with, the Duchenne clinics, but like ERs in general, how to care for someone who has Duchenne. So I'd like to see more of that outreach and education just across the board at, ICU, emergency room, even like our pediatrician. She wasn't familiar with Duchenne either, right? So you sort of get away from your pediatrician and now you're more into like the neurology clinic that you go to for Duchenne. So those would be my wishes, especially the education. Cure Duchenne has like bracelets that has like information like on a QR code that you could scan, and it would bring up the information on Duchenne. Because that's the other thing too. If Jake gets into an accident when he's not with me, who's going to be his voice? So we also need to think about that. And I think that's not just with Duchenne, but autism, you name it. Like, how can you have an advocate there when there is no advocate? I hope that helped.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight. Like, just hearing you speak, like, so many like aspects to like Duchenne that we didn't even cover in our 10-week course. So was really insightful to hear. And, as people said, we're both aspiring to work in the health and medical field. And so we really hope that in the future we'll be able to use the advice you've given and just like implement it, just like even if we don't end up working directly with Duchenne, but just in general, since this is something like a lot more just clinics, hospitals have to be aware of.
And I also think, especially nowadays with social media, especially the physician I work with, she's very big on social media. So just having that platform too to help raise that awareness of other diseases like Duchenne or, like you said, autism or endometriosis, especially too, it can definitely help integrate the doctor into the community. And I think that I totally agree with you. I've had some bad experiences with physicians too, where I just don't feel heard, and I literally will click in. I'm like, I don't want to deal with it. And I bet you've had countless, experiences with that. And so we really appreciate, the advice that you've given. I will totally try my best as a physician to incorporate that as well, because I do truly think that, the relationship a patient and family has with a physician is priceless. And those connections and, relationships are something that are very valuable. And so I think him and I are very happy to have had you and Cheryl, Cheryl and, here today. We really, really appreciate it. Like I told Kerry, the work that you guys have done is absolutely phenomenal. And, we're very impressed and very inspired by your story, Cheryl, because I know it is very difficult as a mom, and especially all the roles that you've had to upheld and stay strong as an example for, your child and your husband and, your daughter. It's a lot. And I can't even imagine, what families go through. But I'm very happy that Kim and I were able to take a course that educated us about a disease most people don't know about. So that we're more aware to be looking out for different diseases like this, and now self-educating ourselves besides having a class. So we really appreciate that. And with that being said, Kim, if you'd like to conclude our interview, go for it.
So just some concluding remarks. So we've learned a lot from both you, Cheryl, and Kerry about Cure Duchenne and about the social and community aspects, and how just the recent COVID-19 pandemic has forced us into social isolation and quarantine and made it really difficult to access healthcare and find strong social support networks, especially for individuals who are immunocompromised. And this increases incidence of mental health issues like stress disorders, just emotional distress and depression, and worsening existing health conditions. But the pandemic has also highlighted how issues of mental health and how we can find alternative outlets to be better to manage our mental health, since maintaining mental health is just as important as maintaining physical health, which you and Kerry both covered. And it's especially important for improving quality of life for patients affected by diseases like DMD and even their caregivers. So for severe diseases like DMD that shorten life expectancies, that are mentally and emotionally taxing for patients, but also for their families, mental health is an essential part of the psychosocial and multidisciplinary care provided for DMD. DMD is a rare disease, and there's a lot of scientists and researchers that are still discovering, cures and treatments. But psychosocial management is an overlapping aspect common among many diseases and disorders, whether they're acute or chronic, like DMD. And getting involved in establishing strong community support, as well as seeking professional help for one's mental well-being, is crucial for self-care and in the journey of coping with DMD, and also for other diseases to improve quality of life. So thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. We are so grateful and appreciative of everything you've said and informed us about.
Well, thank you for having us, because I think these things are so important, because all it can do is create more awareness, right? Which is really what we're all about. So I appreciate your interest, and I could tell on your faces that you were really impacted by what we said. So I think that's huge. So you're listening, right? So I can already see that in your faces. So that's awesome. If anything, if I can ever help with anything, you have my email, reach out. If you want to know more about Jake, I'm happy to share that as well. So anytime you need us, just call on us, and we'll do our best to do what we can to help.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Cheryl. I definitely think, me and Kim will be reaching out towards Cure Duchenne too. I love working with nonprofits, and so that's something I'm really passionate about, and I love the work that you guys are doing. And this interview has definitely made it more personal, since everything that we've learned in class is just more so about, I guess, the biological aspect, genetic aspect, but it's not as personal as I believe this interview was. And so it was really, really lovely hearing, everything you guys had to offer and say. I truly feel more connected to the DMD community too, and I would love to make an impact as well. And so we will be reaching out. With that being said, thank you so much. I know we've held you up for quite a while now.
That's
Longer than
all right.
expected. I said it would be a short interview, but it was definitely longer. But thank you so much. So we really appreciate it.